We had lots of parties in our civilian quarters, and they usually took place in my room and spilled over to Pat's. On the night after the big bloodletting, Don came over and cooked paella for a few of us girls and the GIs from the lab. It was his way of saying thank you to me for helping out in blood bank, he said. Alcohol, which was purchased at the PX, the military store where everything could be found at a reasonable price, was flowing. And of course, there was a regular supply of hash. Naturally, this wasn't available at the PX, but from the streets of Stuttgart. The next day, Pat said she'd come with me to visit Miss Walter, and then we'd go shopping in Stuttgart. As we made our way out of the hospital and through the guard gate, we saw that there were now 2 soldiers on guard and some kind of a metal barrier at it. Apparently, this was a safety measure and deterrent against the Bader-Meinhof gang. "Yeah, we've even got bullets now," said one of the soldiers, laughing as he lifted up his rifle. Faithfully following Miss Walter's perfect directions, we arrived at a very modest building in a quiet suburb and walked upstairs to her apartment on the 2nd floor. Thankfully, we were on time, which I know was very important to her. She shared the apartment with her sister, Elizabeth, but I can't really remember much about her. They were both unmarried and had lived together for most of their lives, eventually ending up in the same retirement home together years later. I do recall that in the bathroom there was a sign above the toilet roll stating the number of pieces to be used. It said in numericals, 1 + 1 + 1, which made both Pat and I giggle. It's funny, the things that stick with you, the things you remember, the little things. As we ate lunch, I commented on Miss Walter's excellent English, and she told me she learnt it in school. She loved the language so much that she went on to become an English teacher. She also taught ballet, which she'd learnt when she was young. But this came to an end when, during the Second World War, a bomb struck a bus which was taking her students to a performance in a hall in central Stuttgart. Miss Walter had not been on the bus and suffered enormous survivor guilt. Because she was saved, she thought it was a sign from God and had since dedicated herself to saving as many people as she could, not only with the word, but with acts of kindness to strangers. She explained how very difficult it was for her to revisit the army hospital and see that watch-keeping soldier with the gun. But she overcame her fear to make sure Pat and I were okay. That meant a great deal to me. I became very fond of this beautiful soul and continued to visit her whilst I was in Germany. We also wrote to one another regularly after I'd moved on to other countries. I've actually kept all of her letters, which I treasure, along with the Bible she gave me that she said would keep me safe during my travels. Her last letter was dated 10 years after we'd met, and I believe it must have been shortly before her death, because I never heard from her again. She was probably around 86 or 87 when she died. I'll never forget Miss Walter, my guardian angel, who made a difference in my life with her spiritual words of wisdom, encouragement and kindness. It was probably around 8 p.m. one night, and all was as quiet as could ever be expected in our quarters, which meant it was buzzing with activity. I was writing letters in my room when I heard a lot of commotion in the hall and my name being called. I went out to see an inebriated Davies from paediatrics standing there, or actually almost falling down. A couple of the girls told him to leave, but he said, "I want to speak to Marie. Marie, I need to talk to you." I let him into my room and sat him down. He started to cry, and I asked him why he was so upset. He told me of the terrible nightmares he had about what he did in Vietnam. He kept saying, "The kids, the kids." "You're great with kids," I told him. He said it was the children in Vietnam that he killed that gave him nightmares. I was shocked when he said that. He told me that Vietnamese kids would come running at the GIs asking for help, but often they would throw grenades at the soldiers, so the GIs had to defend themselves, kill or be killed. I sat stunned at his confession, not knowing what to say. He said he wished his mother had flushed him down the toilet when he was born. It was heartbreaking. What could I say? I just held his hand while he continued to cry. He told me later that he'd had the chance to go back stateside, as he put it, but he requested a transfer to the 5th General Hospital in the hopes that he could get some help before he went home. But the army was failing him, along with so many returning soldiers suffering PTSD. Davis only found solace in alcohol. I was fired up with energy and enthusiasm when I went to the next drug therapy session. I knew I could make a difference and help the addicts. I told Major Cardell of my idea and he said, I want to see that. So he came along too. I thought it would be interesting to start with the trust circle and explained it to the straights and the heads. We'd form a circle, then invite someone into the centre. With their eyes closed, that person falls backwards and has to trust that he or she will be caught by the people forming the circle. "Any volunteers?" I asked. While Davenport and Rogers stood watching with arms folded, clearly not wanting to participate, a couple of nurses as well as social workers helped me form a circle, so there were 6 of us. Then Major Cardell, bless him, volunteered to stand in the middle and fall back. Of course, everyone caught him. "Very cool," he said. I encouraged one of the addicts, Watts, a boy next door type but with needle tracks, who seemed pretty coherent, to step in, and he said, "You first." I did it, and then slowly and with great hesitation, Watts stepped in. Although I don't think he believed that he would be caught, he did it anyway. "What a trip," he said. I continued with role-playing exercises. "Okay, Jackson," I said to a black GI, "you took your dad's car for a joyride and crashed it." Then I said to Hennessy, a little guy with red hair and bloodshot eyes, "Now, Hennessy, you be his dad and you've just found out what he did to your car." Of course, everyone laughed at the pairing. Hennessy really got into the dad's character. He was really good. He got angry, but he was funny with it. There was more laughter, especially from the heads. They enjoyed it. My aim was to let them release their anger, but in a normal or practically normal situation, unrelated to the army in Vietnam. I thought it was much better than shouting abuse at them. At least they were engaged, and so were the straights, except, of course, Davenport and Rogers, who remained stone-faced throughout. Major Cardell congratulated me, and he thought it went really well, and I was grateful for that. However, he got a call from Davenport the next day saying it wasn't working and I should come up with something else for the following week. Well, at least they still wanted me involved, but I was disappointed that we couldn't continue with the psychodrama, and so was Cardell. Anyway, the next week, I go into the session thinking, what's going to happen now? And Davenport said, the psychodrama was boring, so what else have you got up your sleeve? I asked, well, why aren't you doing one-on-one therapy with the addicts? And Davenport said, yeah, okay, let's have one-on-one. You take Jackson, have a one-on-one with him. Naturally, I wasn't suggesting that at all. I just wondered why they weren't doing individual therapy sessions. Now, It probably feels pretty inconceivable to you that here I am, an Englishwoman with absolutely no experience in psychotherapy, being allowed to run therapy sessions. But it seemed I was as qualified as most of these so-called professionals, since they'd only completed 12 weeks of army psychology training. Then they'd been ordered to put a group together as part of the newly formed drug abuse program. But most of them didn't care. They were just going through the motions. But I cared. A few days previously, we'd had random urine testing of all military personnel, including members of the psych clinic. And Davenport's test came back positive for morphine. Cartwright rubbed her hands with glee, since she couldn't stand his supercilious attitude. "We've got him!" She called the general in charge and told him about the positive urine result. "He's the head of the drug abuse program, for God's sake!" But no action was taken against Davenport by his superior, which infuriated Cartwright and me. Next time, payback for Miss Goody Two Shoes. Thanks for listening.